Hello. My name is Dr. Brian Curtice with Fossil Crates, and today I'm here to talk about a paper that just dropped with the lead author, Taylor Oswald. And together we wrote a paper discussing and digging into if Ceratosaurus is a cool Morrison Formation saber-tooth. The paper starts off with discussing how we approached it, but I want to give you a little backstory. Taylor came to me and says, Brian, I have an idea. I want to test to see if Ceratosaurus with those gorgeously long teeth are using them functionally like a saber-tooth uses them. And I thought, well, how are you going to do that? And he told me Morphometrics. Now, we've been playing a couple of publications, Taylor and I together, on Morphometrics, teeth morphometrics of various dinosaurs. I said, well, you know how to do it. What do you need from me? He said, access to saber-tooth cats. So I have access to that. Long story, another day. And I said, hey, I'm happy to help. So we did a bunch of measurements. The great thing about paleontology, and why we call it research to search again, is in this case, we were searching for things that have already been standardized. Way back in 2005, Josh Smith created some standardized ways of measuring teeth when he measured the teeth of the stand Tyrannosaurus, and he showed how he measured it. And others have done that since then, Hendricks and Noto. So as a result, we knew what we needed to do. And if we did it the way they did it, then we could take their measurements and make some cool comparisons. Gotta love that. So that's exactly what we did. So we got work on it and decided that we would write up, we just go after it and see what happens. And it turned into a paper that was accepted into a journal. Now that journal, I'm going to read the exact title here because it's really cool. First of all, it's edited by some powerhouses in our industry, so we're honored to be involved. John Foster, Kelli Trujillo, Rebecca Hunt Foster, Spencer Lucas. They have this journal called New Developments in the Paleontology and Geology of the Upper Jurassic Morrison Formation. And it is chock full of incredibly great papers. It's an honor to be in this volume. This is a volume that will be cited in time immemorial. And our paper has a properly scientific title of, wait for it, that's a little drum roll. It is A Morrison Saber-Tooth, Comparisons of Ceratosaurus Dentition to Other Theropods and Machaerodontidae and its Implications for Ceratosaurus Predatory Ecology. Whew. You can download a copy of it off our blog, just fossilcrates.com, click on the About, Dr. BC's papers, and you'll see it there, which is pretty cool. Now, if you just want to hear the results, I'll spoil it right now. Earmuffs if you want to hear me go through the long, detailed process. The Ceratosaurus teeth are more sabery than even saber-tooth felids. Amazingly, we looked at Smilodon, Homotherium, and Meganterion, and the Ceratosaurus teeth are thinner, more blade-like, which is amazing because if you hold those teeth, they are pretty thin, amongst the thinnest of all the mammals, and yet they're quite robust, about the middle of the pack for theropods. So that was exciting to see. And then we looked at Allosaurus's teeth. They're much more robust than the Ceratosaurus teeth. We checked out Torvosaurus, but we only had access to a couple of teeth from the holotype. The new specimen in Cincinnati has a lot more teeth, and we're waiting for that publication to come out so we can climb all over it and do our comparisons. And then we looked at things like Ornitholestes and Martiosaurus, other dinosaurs from the Morrison Formation. And it turns out that the teeth out-saber some of the saber-tooth teeth, which was cool to see. Another thing that Taylor wanted to test was in 2004, Bacher and Burr made the hypothesis that Ceratosaurus was a semi-aquatic predator based on some features in the tail and its large teeth. So we thought, well, let's compare those teeth to Spinosaurus teeth, and we did so, and as you'd expect, they came out wildly different with no overlap. So we reject the thought that Ceratosaurus is a semi-aquatic predator. We don't address the postcranial reasons why, but from my own personal research on sauropod tails, that's just part of having a tall spine. That doesn't mean you can swim. And the teeth component, that does not mean it can't eat teeth, but they are so wildly different from other piscivores, which have conical teeth. And we can show this mathematically. And that's why you're thinking, Brian, no kidding. But in science, just because you think it, you need to have a way to test it. And so we use morphometrics to show that the Spinosaurus teeth are conical, the Ceratosaurus teeth are bladed. First we'll jump into the Ceratosaurus with the measurements. And we took a whole bunch of measurements on the tooth. And then we used those measurements and turned them into ratios. Now, if you're reading our paper and you're not a tooth expert, which I was not, I made a cheat sheet for myself. We use crown base ratio, we use crown height ratio, and we use crown angle. And in the paper, we declare what we used on the sub-measurements to create those ratios. And then we plotted them on a graph, and we took the crown height ratio on the y-axis and crown base ratio on the x-axis. And that was pretty cool because when we plotted it, you see this neat chart. And as you see right away, Ceratosaurus is here on the far left side of the grid on there. And I'm looking at it right now. And the farther left it is, the more blade-like your teeth are. And you notice it's down there at a CHR of 2. But if you only look at the middle maxillae, the longest maxillary teeth, the longest teeth in the jaw, it moves it up almost to a 3. And that puts it ahead of Homotherium as blade-like thinness and right close to Megantereon. In fact, it eclipsed some of the Megantereons. The plots there are averages. And why we aggregated all of our specimens was to account for any kind of measurement error that other authors whose numbers we used or between Taylor and I. So we used averages to try to smooth out any kind of measuring variances we might have. And you see on the far right, it shows those thicker teeth of Allosaurus. And surprisingly, Ornitholestes teeth are pretty robust. That made me smile to see. Now, the higher up on the y-axis you go, the longer those tooth crowns are. And to no one's surprise, Smilodon is the big champ with those huge sabers. They have huge tooth crowns. But they're far more robust than I realized. And then Torvosaurus, we only had 2 teeth in our study. So everything with Torvosaurus should get an asterisk. We had 18 Ceratosaur teeth, 14 Allosaur teeth, 6 Marchosaurus teeth, 4 Ornitholestes teeth, 8 Smilodons, 5 Homotherium, and 4 Megantereon. We had a pretty good sample on some and a marginally good sample on others, but in paleontology, hey, 4 is a lot. And I like this because it shows that Ceratosaurus is very blade-like. Now, what's Marchosaurus doing? I have no idea. Well, we've got to go dig into that one further. It surprised me. Now here we have the same x-axis on this table, this figure, that shows the robustness on the right to the left, but we plotted it against the angulation. Now we use the crown angle as a proxy for recurvature. Some other studies have shown that's all right to do, for our purposes at least. And as you see, Ceratosaurus is very straight, and Torvosaurus is straight and long, whereas when you get to the right, like Allosaurus and Ornitholestes, the teeth are curved. Smilodon is curved and tall. So again, it shows that Ceratosaurus is out here on its own little world, doing its own little thing, which is pretty cool. Said another way, Torvosaurus and Homotherium have the straightest teeth, they're way up top. Marchosaurus and Allosaurus have the most curved teeth. Ceratosaurus has moderately curved, very gracile, straighter teeth than the short-toothed taxa, but they're slightly more curved than Smilodon and Megantereon, which matches our visual observation. And that's another thing I want to point out here. Just because Morphometrics shows it it looks like this, it's always super important to go back and look at the teeth themselves. So I've spent some time in Hwange National Park in Zimbabwe and observing the savanna and the wildlife therein. And what you have there is 5 felids that interact. The little tiny ones like the caracals and the servals. Then you have cheetahs, leopards, and the king of the jungle, the lion. And interesting, Dry Mesa Quarry, where I've spent a good part of my career, you have 5 theropods that exist there. You have Allosaurus, Ceratosaurus, Marchosaurus, Ornitholestes, Torvosaurus, and maybe even a few others. So in Africa, we know they live in different habitats, some lightly wooded areas versus open savanna. And we suspect that that's something that would help separate these 5 theropods in the Morrison Formation. They could be living in different habitats, and that would reduce competition. You could also reduce competition by having some being nocturnal, some being diurnal, and some being crepuscular, only active at dawn and dusk. That would help as well. The challenge is, at Dinosaur National Monument, we have a number of these taxa. I think 4 of the 5. Cleveland Lloyd has 4 of the 5 for sure. And Dry Mesa has all 5, but might be a drought environment, which could have brought them all in outside of their habitats. So we can't use habitat for sure to explain why all of these are living together. But what we can do is look at the teeth and hypothesize, well, what could be going on here? And Torvosaurus of the theropods in the Morrison is at least at this time period in this localities, is the longest and heaviest of the bunch. Allosaurus has a huge range in size, and it seems to be the most generalized. And we say that because we found 9 papers talking about Allosaurus' different feeding strategies. We had none on Torvosaurus, but that doesn't really surprise us. It's a poorly known animal with only a few publications. I'm hoping the Cincinnati specimen changes a lot on that. And then Ceratosaurus, which surprisingly had some hypotheses proposed about its feeding with those teeth. It has not gone unnoticed that those teeth are really cool and probably doing something different. A lot of folks like to point out that Ceratosaurus is the smallest of those big 3. Torvosaurus is clearly the biggest, followed by Allosaurus, which could go up to 10 meters long, followed by our good friend Ceratosaurus, which is 7 meters long and arguably much lighter built on these larger animals. Now, part of me thinks that Ceratosaurus is getting a raw deal, but I want to stop and say Ceratosaurus is my favorite because it has armor down its back. No other theropod does that, except maybe Pycnonemosaurus, and those are in the skin. And it has the cool Ceratosaurus, which was named after the nasal horn, which is just spectacular. And then it's got those sabers. I mean, it's got it all. Ceratosaurus is so cool. Now, with Allosaurus, some of the things that made me giggle was there's been so many different modes of eating proposed. From that classic axe-eating, mouth open, stabbing away. I don't think that happened, but it's a really cool idea, at least visually stunning. So it's open mouth slashing. Then you've got probably more realistic forelimb assisted bite and hold asphyxiation. Bite something and uses those huge claws. Allosaurus' arms are enormously strong with gigantic thumb claws. So there's been proposal it was a cannibal, that perhaps it was a cooperative group hunter. I don't like either of those. Cannibalism will be a side product, like you see with, I think, Majungasaurus. And cooperative group hunting, I just don't see dinosaurs doing that personally. Scavenging, we're not even going to talk about that. It's wrong on so many reasons, but there's been 2 papers on it by the group up in the Northwest that are like it a lot. And agnostic aggregations of unaligned individuals. That's Taylor's phrase for Komodo dragon style feeding, where they'll all grab onto a different part of the deer and pull it down. So they work together, I suppose. But then once the deer's down, it's every lizard for themselves. And that's where you get cannibalism among Komodo dragons, is the smaller ones that try to get in on that deer action are often killed and eaten because Komodos don't care. Now, a couple proposals for Ceratosaurus, while we're in this topic, have been that those hyper-elongate mid-maxillary teeth were useful as recognition devices. Hey, that's a ceratosaur. As if the nose horn and armor wasn't cool enough. Maybe it used them to communicate somehow. I'm not proposing it had lips. I'm not a lip fan. Why? Because the fundamental problem, in my opinion, with the lips paper is N equals 1. They use 1 Tyrannosaur tooth to say the teeth lasted 3 years, and it's not even a Tyrannosaurus tooth. It's a Tyrannosaur tooth. If they give me 3, 4, 5, 6 more teeth that show that the Tyrannosaur teeth are 3 years or longer, cool. But right now, every other theropod has this 30, 60, 90, 120 day mouth turnover, and this one outlier based on 1 tooth makes me really nervous. The rest of the arguments kind of, you could go either way, but that is a key argument that needs to be bolstered. So I wait for that to happen. Maybe someday I'll wade into that fray. I digress completely, except to say that some folks have argued that the Ceratosaurus was using the big giant teeth as possibly being the aquatic, semi-aquatic predator. I don't think that's the case either. We'll talk about that later. And then they've noticed that definitely the whole way Ceratosaurus is built is different from Allosaurus and Torvosaurus. So they're clearly doing something different. And the thought is, if their body is so different and their teeth are so different, then it's got to be feeding differently. And they don't go into what or how, except one proposal suggested that it was actually taking on sauropods. And to that, I kind of giggled, but then I thought, well, what if the sauropod's neck is out and it's taking a drink and this thing springs from ambush, opens its mouth, clumps down really hard, one cool deep bite, dig those things in, rip through into puncturing the trachea, puncturing the air sac. Let's get in there and cause some damage. And then bite, because when that neck comes back, even a small sauropod would pick up a ceratosaur and fling it aside, and then let it bleed out. It's a possibility. And that's a nice segue into one of our thoughts, is that The reason that Ceratosaurus has these big giant saber teeth is for a quick kill. Now, if Ceratosaurus is truly the smallest of the big three, then it's going to have a problem with kleptoparasitism. And that's a scenario that we've seen in Africa where a cheetah will make a kill and the impala screams, and that alerts other big cats. And then next thing you know, the African lion walks up and takes the kill away. So it needs to kill fast, take it up a tree, or just eat as much as it can before it gets bullied away. And perhaps Ceratosaurus had that same problem. So if you're eating smaller size prey like a Dryosaurus, a Nanosaurus, and you can go in and kill it in one bite and then just quickly start eating. And the Ceratosaur premaxillary teeth are much more robust than all the teeth in the maxilla. So maybe it was using it after it's killed it to rip it open and then just go at it quickly. Now, Taylor and I studied the Seriema, and what we learned is it has the killing claw, like the Velociraptor. And what surprised us both was how rarely it used those. When it used them, it would use to pin down the mouse. It would stomp on it, pin it with that sharp claw, and then use its hooked beak to reach down and rip huge chunks of flesh out and kill the mouse. When it found snakes, it just grabbed them and threw them down on the ground repeatedly. It didn't use its claws. The thought is, most of the time the Seriema, not thought, we saw, grabbed these mice and lizards, flipped them in the air and swallowed it, kind of like a cormorant in the water with fish. And it surprised us because we thought it was going to be using this cool claw and we're getting all this footage, and most of the food that we fed it, they just swallowed. So what if Ceratosaurus with that oversized head bites, stabs, flips, swallows small prey? The problem with small prey is they're not calorically that great. And this is a decent sized animal. Anything 1,500 pounds to a ton and a half, that's a lot of weight. That's taking some calories. And its legs are short proportionately to the two other theropods, so it likely was not a long distance pursuit predator. So our visioning is it's sitting in ambush, it pops out, it can even potentially take down a reasonable sized Camptosaurus with one well-placed bite, maybe two in succession. The animal bleeds out, you get stabbed with a dozen steak knives all around in this good-sized, mouth-sized wound. That is going to be a gore fest and a bloody mess. You quickly die out, it starts eating, or if it's a smaller animal, it flips it up. It minimizes its chance of being hurt by doing that attack. And that's what, when I grew up, Smilodon and all the saber-tooths were hunting big, massive predators, going for the kill with those giant sabers. But in the last decade and a half or so, the academic community has pivoted from saber-tooths killing giant prey to saber-tooths using the sabers to kill fast. Now, we know Smilodon populator killed megatheriums and likely big proboscideans, and down in South America, these toxodonts and other huge animals. But these smaller ones especially, like Homotherium, Megantherion, these sabers do a great job of quickly dispatching because they puncture through a neck, they'll rip through, hit arteries, rip into the windpipe, and stab, bite. You could probably hold on and pull it to the ground. And that's a key. Cats today will do that. Like clouded leopards are the closest thing we have to saber-tooth. And if you've watched a leopard or a lion, they'll grab it by the throat, they'll lay on it until it chokes out and dies asphyxiated. And maybe Allosaurus or Ceratosaurus could do that. The problem is Ceratosaurus arms are small, but it compensates with an oversized head. So we don't have direct comparisons, but the thought is still, if you look for a quick kill, not much is going to cause a bleed out faster than a whole mouthful of super sharp steak knives. Now, an interesting side note, in these saber-tooth felids that we looked at, their teeth are thicker than the Ceratosaur, but I think that's in part because they're mammals. You get baby teeth, you get adult teeth. You break your adult teeth, you have problems. And I've personally seen saber-tooths where one tooth is broken off and the other one, the whole side of the body has been used more, preferentially stabs with that tooth, and you can see it in the postcranial musculature or skeleton. It's amazing to see. I'll see if I can find some pictures. And that's cool. Ceratosaurus doesn't have that problem. It's replacing its teeth really rapidly, 4 months, 6 months. And so if it breaks a bunch of teeth, well, it's going to get new ones very soon in comparison to a mammal where it's not getting any more. So it has to be a little more cognizant of what it's doing with it. That also means that the Ceratosaur teeth can be that much thinner, that much sharper, penetrate that much deeper, and really cause a lot of damage. Now also keep in mind we have a juvenile Ceratosaurus skull, so we know even the juveniles had these really big oversized teeth, and we have juvenile Allosaurus skulls or smaller ones that show that their teeth remain about the same proportions as the adults, like Ceratosaurus juvis to adults. So whatever was going on, they were definitely doing the same. The adults and juveniles had similar builds, if you will. And also, small Allosaurs and medium Allosaurs would compete with adult Ceratosaurs. And when you get down in the food chain, all these smaller animals are competing against the smaller Theropods. So we don't see Ceratosaurus attacking sauropods unless they're babies, or unless the idea of it bites the neck. And then even if it does kill a sauropod, it has to eat pretty quick, because it's unlikely that if an Allosaurus shows up or a Torvosaurus shows up, it's going to eat on one end while the Ceratosaurus that did all the damage eats on the other. So we think that Ceratosaurus most likely was eating these smaller ornithopods. Probably not stegosaurs, plates, spikes, dangerous. Interestingly enough, we believe that Allosaurus was eating stegosaurs. Well, we know we have bones of stegosaurus and of various sauropod limb bones with pretty deep bites. We're working on a paper right now trying to identify the bite maker of some spectacular Morrison bites. The thought process is perhaps Allosaurus was more attuned to biting and hitting bone than a Ceratosaurus. Those thin teeth, if it hit bone, would break. It's not going to be a good day for it. And therefore, Allosaurus was either eating different prey, different times of the day, versus a Ceratosaur, where eating the Ceratosaurus kills. That could be maybe part of the scavenging argument. Here we go. But it is neat to see that this dentition that we see visually is morphometrically captured. And because in our paper we list all of our measurements and our methodology, we can keep adding to this data set. And we can add other animals. I've had a request for Inostronsvia already, the Saber-Tooth down in the Permian. And that'd be fun to add that one in. The lips paper was great because they defined their methodology. And the team that I work with has added a bunch of animals to our own lips regression line as we go and study extant and extinct animals, just to see where they plot. And the same can be done with our paper. So we're hoping our paper really is a starting point. Could we be wrong? Absolutely. Does it mean that because the teeth are shaped like sabers, they were used as sabers? No. But we like to think that teeth are a reasonable analog towards what it was eating and perhaps how it was eating it. Which pivots to the semi-aquatic ceratosaur. The Spinosaurus teeth are really, really different. We use conicality, as we call it, the conicalness. So we use the CBR, and you can see in this graph here. So we match the crown-base ratios, and we're comparing them to the different taxa by tooth segment or mouth segment. And that was cool because we got the premax, the max, and the dentary of Ceratosaurus and Allosaurus, because they have those three, and the teeth are different in the premax versus the maxilla. And we plotted this box and whisker plots. And you can see this one red arrow on the far, or circle, is an outlier. Why that tooth came out that way, we don't know. We should probably measure it a third time just to check. But you see outside of that tooth, Ceratosaurus has no overlap with Spinosaurus. And Spinosaurus, we had a bunch of teeth for the Spinosaurus and the Ceratosaurus study. And the Allosaurus, that's why they're the three up there. What you also see is the different elements don't overlap. The lower jaw of Ceratosaurus doesn't have any lower overlap with the lower jaw of Allosaurus. And likewise, the premax of Ceratosaurus and the premax of Allosaurus only slightly overlap. And that's because of those outliers on the Allosaurus side. Just kick it down. And when you look at the averages right in the middle there, there's no overlap. And the maxilla of the Ceratosaurus differs from the maxilla of Allosaurus. What's cool with Spinosaurus, you put it in the mix, and our hypothesis was if it was aquatic, it should look similar to our good friend Spinosaurus. Only the premaxillary teeth had overlap with Spinosaurus, and that was only on the lower end of the Spinosaurus. But Spinosaurus overlapped a ton with Allosaurus. So if you're just looking at morphometrics, you'd say Allosaurus is your semi-aquatic predator based on tooth shape, not Ceratosaurus. We don't think Allosaurus is a semi-aquatic predator any more than we think Ceratosaurus was. but it's neat to see how when you plot these out, it at least gives you a different frame of reference. And that's what we really tried to do. This was a fun paper for us. We wanted to discuss what could be going on. How can we test our, let's call it fanboy hypothesis of Ceratosaurus as a saber-tooth? And we wanted to employ something that was testable and then publish on it and let people do what we do best. We tear it apart in science, show us where we messed up, show us what we should have thought of more. And this is only on teeth. What happens when you look at the rest of the postcranial structure? And there's a lot really well known on all three of these taxa on this chart. So lots that we can study, lots more to do. But we had so much fun making this paper. As an aside, I got to put in a picture of Geniodectes. That's an animal that I hope to touch in the next year or two when I go down to Argentina. It looks really cool. There's more than just this. Those teeth proportionately, if we're looking at this graph right, are even longer than the Ceratosaurus teeth. So that's kind of exciting when you think of it that way. And I also got a chance, we saw for the first time in my world, actual material in Italy of Megantherion and Homotherium. So I got to show off some pics there and got to see a lot of their material on display in various in Italian museums. Super cool. Florence Museum, go visit it if you get the shot. Really a lot of fun. It's great fun working with Taylor. Great fun playing with the theropods. I'm a sauropod lad. I'm not pivoting to theropod world. Don't worry, sauropod folks. But for me, with my gray hair and my curiosity, and I see so many things, it's time that I look out around. And so if you're looking for co-author opportunities, you can put me as last author. If I've got information, shoot me an email, brian@fossilcrates.com. I'm always willing to work with independents as well, because I know how tough it can be to find a job or get into a grad school program, but that doesn't mean you're not really good at what you do. So I'm Dr. Brian Curtice with Fossil Crates, saying thank you kindly. Adios.